Snow hammered the Blue Ridge like a fist from the sky. Wind howled down the hollows, turning every ridge into a white wall. By dawn on January 17th, 1883, the Hensley cabin stood swallowed in ice, its chimney buried, its door sealed shut by a mountain's wrath. Why does this matter? Because what rescuers uncovered inside changed the way Appalachia whispers about winter storms forever. The cabin squatted on the edge of Wolfpine Hollow, a timber shack blackened by decades of smoke and patched with bark shingles. The storm had already raged for 5 days. Neighbors, themselves trapped, swore they could hear voices carried on the wind, voices chanting in rhythm, like a hymn twisted into something unholy. By the 7th day, silence. No smoke from the chimney, no tracks in the snow, just stillness. 3 weeks later, when a rescue party of 6 men trudged up from the valley, the mountain gave them its first warning. The air carried a copper tang, sharp and metallic, like blood left too long in the cold. Their boots sank to the knees, and every breath came out like shattered glass. But still, they pressed forward. The door was iced shut, frozen as if the storm itself wanted no man to enter. Hatchets splintered the frame, a crack bursting like a gunshot through the woods. Inside, frost coated the rafters, glittering like teeth. The rescuers' lanterns cut through haze, revealing a sight they would never speak of without trembling. The Hensley parents, rigid in their chairs, skin blue-white, eyes open and glassy, and their mouths sewn tight with coarse black thread. The youngest rescuer, Samuel Price, dropped his lantern. His voice cracked like a boy's. God help us. They're stitched like sacks. But upstairs came movement. Slow, deliberate creaks of floorboards. The rescuers, against every instinct, climbed. The children sat in a circle. Their hair hung in tangled ropes, their fingers raw from gnawing wood. Lantern light caught their teeth, filed sharp, each one jagged as a knife's edge. They whispered in perfect unison, voices weaving like wind through pine needles. We're still hungry. The rescuers stumbled back, crossing themselves, some gagging into their gloves. For weeks, the valley would argue about what they should have done next. Save the children, leave them, quarantine the house. But here's where you come in. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. While you're at it, hit like if this opening chilled you, and subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. What kind of family sews its own mouth shut? And why were the children left alive, whispering hunger into the blizzard night? The answer lies in the Hensley's legacy, rumors of storms they could summon, and a history too many neighbors chose to ignore. The first of many secrets. The hollow always carried its own weather. Travelers swore that a sunny sky on the ridge could turn to sleet the moment you crossed the Hensley property. Rain came sudden, lightning struck close, and snow clung longer to their fields than anywhere else in Madison County. Locals muttered that the Hensleys pulled the clouds down like curtains, a saying so old it slipped into nursery rhymes. Why should you care? Because the storm that sealed their cabin wasn't the first tied to their name. It was the last in a century of whispered warnings. Picture Wolfpine Hollow in the early 1800s, wet earth smelling of moss, the hiss of rain against cedar shingles, and the rough grain of bark peeled for kindling. It was here that Ezekiel Hensley, the first patriarch, staked his claim. He arrived in 1809 with a wife and a newborn, carving his farm out of land other settlers avoided. The soil was rich, yes, but the storms came too often, too sudden. Neighbors lost livestock to floods. Their children shivered with fevers. But Ezekiel's crops thrived. One entry survives from the county ledger, dated August 12, 1821. Hensley's corn tall where others rot. No hail upon his ground, though the storm split fences both north and south. Some say he made a bargain. A bargain. The word stuck. By the 1840s, when lightning burned a church steeple just after Ezekiel's youngest daughter was denied baptism, the Hensleys were no longer just farmers. They were storm callers. But here's the truth that makes this tale so chilling. No one stopped trading with them. No one shunned their market stall. Families bought Hensley corn, drank Hensley cider, even as they whispered the family could summon rain to ruin a rival's hay. People turned their eyes away, because survival in the mountains often meant ignoring what you feared most. What would you do if your neighbor's prosperity looked cursed? Confront him, or quietly buy his grain because your children were hungry. That silence is what allowed the legend to grow. By 1855, a flood swept through Wolfpine Hollow, drowning 2 mills and a dozen homes. The only farm spared? The Hensleys. Neighbors dug through mud and ruin, and from the ridge they claimed they heard laughter carrying on the storm. One miller's widow swore Ezekiel's grandson stood on the porch, arms raised to the lightning. The account was dismissed as grief-struck rambling, but her words echo in the courthouse archive. He beckoned the thunder like it was kin. By the winter of 1883, when the blizzard struck, locals no longer asked if the Hensleys had power. They argued only about the cost. Some said each storm required a sacrifice. Others claimed the family had learned to turn hunger inward, sealing their mouths to keep from devouring what they loved. And that is why rescuers feared more than frostbite when they stepped into that cabin. They feared a covenant older than themselves. But here's the question. If the storms were truly bound to the Hensleys, then who or what was listening when their children whispered, "We're still hungry"? The next clue lies not in the cabin itself, but in a journal hidden beneath the floorboards, one that surfaced decades later, written in a hand that trembled. The words inside could explain everything, or nothing at all. A century after the blizzard, contractors pried up the warped floorboards of the Hensley ruin. Beneath lay a leather-bound book, its cover stiff with mildew, its pages stuck together like pressed leaves. The smell of rot and iron filled the room, sharp enough to sting the throat. The men dropped it, swore it whispered when it hit the ground. Why does this matter? Because that journal, dated November 18, 1882, offers the closest thing to a confession the Hensleys ever left behind. The first entry read, "The clouds answer when we call, but they do not depart empty. Something must be paid. If not by field or flock, then by flesh. If not by flesh, then by hunger." It was signed only with the initial J. Historians suspect Jeremiah Hensley, eldest son of the house. The handwriting shivered across the page as though written with a shaking hand. The journal continued with weather tallies, numbers etched alongside marks of cattle births, crop yields, and inexplicable notes like "wind fed, safe this month." But between the mundane came darker fragments. One passage, dated December 3rd. "Ma stitched her lips tonight. She said the silence keeps the hunger from finding us. Pa watched but did not stop her. He fears the storm within more than the storm without." Storm within. That phrase appears 5 more times, always in moments of deep winter. What did it mean? Some scholars argue it was metaphor, mental collapse brought by isolation. Others claim it hinted at a pact, one that demanded silence as tribute. Yet the most chilling entry comes just weeks before the blizzard. The children's teeth are ready. They sing when the snow falls. They do not complain of hunger, though they gnaw the wood. If the storm takes us, it will leave them. They are its seed. Seed of what? And here's where the story folds back on itself. Remember the rescuers in 1883? Local reports say the children were taken into custody, carried down the ridge on sleds. But no record survives of where they were placed, or if they were even named. The courthouse fire of 1902 destroyed dozens of files, and the Hensley case was among them. Which leaves us with the journal, half-rotted, half-legible, yet brimming with dread. Was Jeremiah chronicling madness or ritual? One contractor who handled the book in 1987 swore his barn roof collapsed in a storm the same night. Another claimed his cattle bellowed all night when he stored the journal under his bed. Superstition? Maybe. But it's worth asking, why did no archive or museum ever accept it? Every institution returned it. What would you do if history handed you a book that seemed to summon weather with every word? Would you keep it safe or burn it before the clouds noticed your name? The journal ends mid-sentence on January 12, 1883. They are hungry, but the hunger is not theirs. The ink trails off there, a broken thought. And 4 days later, the blizzard began. Which begs the question, did Jeremiah's unfinished sentence explain why the children lived while their parents froze with mouths sewn? The answer may lie in stories passed down by neighbors, accounts of strange lights, wandering shapes, and the last time anyone saw the children of the Hensleys alive. The wind rattled tin against the eaves of a neighbor's barn. The night rescuers carried the Hensley children down the mountain. Lantern light shook across snow so deep it swallowed the men to their waists. The air reeked of kerosene, damp wool, and something metallic, like rust or blood. Why does this matter? Because those children should have died alongside their kin. Instead, they survived the cold, their mouths unsewn, their voices fused into one eerie chorus. Witness accounts diverge. A deputy from Clay County wrote that the children never cried, not once during the 2-day journey into town. They simply whispered, lips nearly touching, a murmur too faint to catch unless you leaned close. Another rescuer claimed they refused food, chewing instead on splinters pried from their sled rails until their gums bled. Filed testimony from February 21, 1883 reads, "The youngest, girl, about 6, sang a hymn I half knew. Only the words were bent, phrases missing, others repeated backward. The other 2 joined in, all 3 smiling though their mouths were raw. I swear on my life they sang the snow thicker. Snow thicker." By March, the children had been separated and sent to households willing to take them in. Fosterage was common then, and in the wake of such horror, the county rushed to disperse them quietly. No names were recorded in public logs. That absence alone raises questions. Was it protection or concealment? Locals whispered that each household soon reported oddities. In Manchester, a cow dropped dead overnight, her body rigid, nostrils packed with ice though the barn was sealed. In Hazard, a cabin collapsed after an unexpected hailstorm, killing a family that had taken in one of the boys. And in Jackson, parishioners left church one morning to find every window etched with tiny scratches, as though filed teeth had worried the glass. Patterns emerged. Bad weather followed the children. Misfortune clung to their foster families. By autumn of that year, all 3 were missing. The official story said they wandered away. Others insisted the families drove them out after too many strange nights. But one account, from a circuit preacher who claimed to see them in the hills, offers a darker possibility. I found them by a sycamore stump, hands clasped, whispering in unison. When they looked up, their eyes were pale as sleet. They asked me if I was still hungry. I fled before I could answer. Still hungry. What became of them after they vanished? Some believe they perished in the woods. Others insist they thrived, moving between hollers, calling storms the way their parents once had. Even in the 1920s, old-timers spoke of 3 pale figures glimpsed on ridges before a flood or blizzard struck. Could the Hensley children have survived into adulthood, carrying their family's curse forward? That's the thread historians chase, because if they did, their bloodline may not have ended in 1883. And in the next section, we'll trace sightings and deaths linked to that possible legacy, spanning nearly half a century of Appalachian history. The courthouse bell in Jackson tolled 9 o'clock the night the spring flood hit in 1901. Rain hammered the tin roofs so hard the whole town trembled. The air smelled of river mud and lightning-charred pine. Survivors swore they heard children laughing in the thunder. Why does this matter? Because for the first time in 2 decades, reports tied deadly weather to figures resembling the lost Hensley children. A schoolteacher's diary, recovered after her death, held this passage. April 15th, 3 children came to my porch. Their hair was white, though their faces were young. They asked for shelter. When I refused politely, the sky split open. Water rose before midnight. I never saw them again. White hair, young faces. The storm drowned 11 families along the river. County records show more than 30 livestock killed, houses swept off their foundations. Yet the odd detail persists. Multiple witnesses saw 3 small figures on the ridge above town as the waters rose. They did not run. They seemed to watch. By 1912, rumors had evolved into warnings. Parents told children to stay inside when thunder rolled over the ridges. The Hensleys are walking, they said. Superstition, perhaps, but deaths aligned with sightings. A farmer in Leslie County claimed he awoke to hoofbeats on his roof during a hailstorm. His horses lay frozen stiff in their stalls at dawn. He named the Hensley brood as cause. And then came the influenza winter of 1918. While disease swept Appalachia, one mountain community reported something stranger. 3 orphans were taken in by a family near Hazard, their origins vague. Within weeks, that family perished. Not of flu, but exposure. Neighbors found the cabin doors barred from the outside, the hearth cold, the adults frozen in their chairs. Upstairs, the orphans were gone. Scratches marked the window frames, storm children. Each generation layered more dread onto the tale. By the 1920s, miners in Breathitt County refused to work when lightning struck clear skies, believing it a sign the children were near. An old ballad, carried in coal camps, went, "3 mouths whisper, 3 mouths bite, storms will follow through the night." Skeptics point out the pattern may be coincidence. Floods, blizzards, flu. Appalachia endured hardship by nature. But believers note the specificity. Always 3, always pale, always whispering. And one unresolved question shadows every report. If the Hensley children survived, what became of their descendants? In the next section, we'll follow a line of names, birth records, marriage ledgers, and gravestones that suggest the bloodline didn't vanish in the snow, but seeped quietly into Appalachian families that still live in those hills today. The whisper persists. Coal dust clung to the air like soot in Harlan County during the summer of 1934. The smell of sulfur, sweat, and damp earth made the mines feel closer to the surface than they were. In that season, county clerks noted a curious cluster of names. Hensley marriages, births, and unexplained deaths all within a 30-mile radius. Why does this matter? Because the official record suggests the Hensley line did not end in that blizzard. It scattered. It hid. Take the marriage ledger of June 2, 1927. A woman listed only as M. Hensley wed a miner named Thomas Keene. Within 6 months, Keene was dead, crushed in a collapse no one else was near. Locals whispered he'd laughed at thunder rolling underground just days before. His widow left town the next morning. No forwarding address. 7 years later, another file. Infant Keene, born still in Breathitt County. The coroner's notes included one unusual detail. Filed teeth in a child not yet 6 months old. Filed teeth. Pattern interrupts appear in burial logs, too. In 1941, a preacher recorded 3 headstones marked with crude symbols instead of names. Each bore the same scratched phrase, "We are still hungry." Could these be coincidences? Skeptics argue yes. Yet when genealogists map the tangled lines of Appalachian families, the Hensley name threads through every hollow. And more often than chance, tragedy strikes where that name appears. Here's where bystanders come in. Neighbors admitted seeing odd behavior, children whispering in chorus, livestock bolting before storms, but most looked away. One miner's wife confessed decades later, "We kept silent, everyone did. If you noticed the Hensleys too much, the weather noticed you back. What would you do? Speak or survive?" Even census takers left gaps. In 1950, 3 households in Perry County refused to give children's names, claiming illness. Inspectors let it slide. Easier to mark absent than press a family already hardened by hunger and isolation. But silence can't cover everything. Court documents from 1963 reveal an arson trial where a witness swore the accused boy called the rain to hide his tracks. The boy's surname? Hensley. The whispers grew louder, and so the question sharpened. If storms followed the family, did the family learn to command them or fear them? In the next section, we'll follow into modern times, where the Hensley legacy collides with science. Meteorologists, folklorists, and descendants themselves weigh in on whether the storms of Appalachia are natural or born from an ancient hunger that never froze to death in that cabin. Still hungry. Thunder cracked over Leslie County on July 12, 1979. The air stank of ozone, wet pine, and gasoline from chainsaws abandoned mid-shift. The storm came without warning. No radar signature, no forecast mention. It hammered one hollow so precisely that neighboring towns stayed bone dry. And in that hollow, a reunion of the Hensley kin. This is why it matters. Science itself seemed to falter against the family's legend. Meteorologists combed the data. Dr. Elaine Corcoran, then a graduate researcher at the University of Kentucky, wrote, "Localized microbursts cannot explain the precision of rainfall reported. The event borders on folkloric." She included testimony from a sheriff's deputy who swore the rain fell in sheets, but stopped at the ridge like a wall. Folklorists seized the chance to link storms with superstition. Filed teeth, whispered hunger. These could be metaphors, they argued, for Appalachian poverty chewing at its own children. Yet when pressed, locals pushed back. One retired miner told a newspaper, "Call it poverty if you like, but I seen lightning hit twice in the same yard, and that yard carried a Hensley name." The debate exposed a fracture line. On one side, science reaching for explanations. Unusual wind patterns, atmospheric pockets, the randomness of weather. On the other, generations of witnesses insisting the storms followed blood, not clouds. And then there were the descendants themselves. In 1982, a woman named Clara Hensley applied for Social Security in Lexington. Her records flagged because her birth date aligned with the fateful blizzard winter, yet no death was ever logged. When interviewed, she laughed at questions of storms and hunger, but kept a scarf pulled tight around her jaw. A clerk noted in her file, "Teeth appear unnaturally pointed." Filed teeth. So what do we believe? That a family trauma birthed legends that weather seemed to obey? Or that something older, something the hills themselves harbored, moved through the bloodlines? Neighbors still enabled silence. During that 1979 storm, a family stranded on the opposite ridge begged for rescue. Yet search parties delayed until skies cleared, claiming safety concerns. Their house collapsed under rainfall. 2 lives lost. The deputy later admitted, off record, nobody wanted to cross through Hensley Hollow in the middle of their storm. What would you have done? By the late 20th century, science had its excuses. Folklore had its stories. But the storms kept coming, and each generation, more whispers of children who still whispered back. Filed teeth, whispered hunger, weather like a weapon. In the next section, we'll bring it into the present day, where locals swear the Hensleys haven't vanished at all. They've only adapted, still hungry. By the turn of the 21st century, Leslie County should have forgotten the Hensleys. The mines closed, the schools consolidated, and young folks left the mountains chasing factory work in Ohio and the Carolinas. But the old hollow never emptied completely. In fact, some say it grew tighter, more secretive. Satellite imagery from 2003 shows collapsed barns and trailers overrun with kudzu, but locals report light flickering there at night. Kerosene, not electric. One hunter told the Lexington Herald he followed a deer trail too far and stumbled onto smoke rising from a chimney no county map acknowledges. "I saw a girl," he said. "Couldn't have been more than 16. Long black hair, standing barefoot in the snow. She didn't run, just smiled, and I swear her teeth looked wrong." Filed. Modern genealogists tried to trace surviving lines, but courthouse fires, missing baptismal records, and sealed state files frustrate the effort. Still, the surname surfaces: school rosters, arrest logs, property disputes. Never loud, never clustered, but always there. Always enough to remind people that hunger may sleep, but it doesn't die. Whispers adapt with the times. Truckers say they've lost CB signals near the hollow, as if storms still brew from nothing. Utility crews refuse to work past dusk in those ridges. In 2006, a telecom tower went down during a squall no Doppler radar caught. Workers arrived the next morning to find claw marks up the metal like someone, or something, had climbed it during the lightning. When pressed, locals give the same shrug their grandparents gave. "Ain't nothing up there but family." But neighbors still turn their eyes away. School children bullied for their last name often transfer by middle school. Deputies say calls for welfare checks in the hollow rarely result in reports. No one wants to look too closely. And here's the thing. Every culture has its ghosts. Most fade with time, worn down to tourist attractions and campfire tales. But not this one. The Hensleys linger in birth certificates and obituaries, in unexplained power outages, and in storms that roll through a single ridge while the next one stays dry. The Appalachian family history no one dares to tell isn't just buried in the past. It is still unfolding, still hungry, still whispering, still stormbound. And if you think that's only folklore, remember this. When our team tried to reach the hollow for interviews, the road washed out. Blue skies on every side but one. Was it just weather? Or was it blood calling the storm again?